The deadliest nightmares of the Nazi Eastern Front were not high-tech bombers, but Soviet women flying open-cockpit crop dusters, too slow for German fighters to even shoot down, aircraft so primitive that one tracer could ignite them mid-flight. Stalin called it desperation, and the Luftwaffe called it terror. Why did these coffins with wings become the most feared night raiders of World War II? June 22, 1941. Operation Barbarossa hits the Soviet Union with a force no one expected. In the first week alone, the Red Air Force loses nearly 2,000 aircraft, wings and fuselages burning on airfields from Minsk to Kiev. By November, the Luftwaffe controls the skies. Soviet pilots are shot down faster than replacements can be trained, and entire squadrons vanish in days. German panzers push east, closing on Moscow, while Soviet command scrambles for any answer to the disaster overhead. Airfields become graveyards. Mechanics cannibalize wrecks for spare parts, but the flow of new planes cannot keep up with the rate of destruction. Each week brings fresh reports, another 100 aircraft lost, another gap in the front line. The Red Army's best pilots are dead or missing. With every city that falls, desperation grows. Commanders start to consider options once unthinkable. Calls go out for anyone with flying experience, no matter their background. The Soviet Union faces a simple calculation. Without more pilots and planes in the air, the Eastern Front will collapse. The door opens, not out of vision or ideology, but out of the raw need to survive. Marina Raskova, already famous for her record-setting flights, took her case straight to Stalin. She did not ask for a token experiment. She demanded full combat authorization. Stalin gave her more than permission. He gave her command. Within weeks, 3 all-female regiments were established. The 586th received fighters, the 587th got heavy bombers, and the 588th was handed the job no one wanted, night harassment sorties. Their assignment came with a verdict. Expendable. The pilots of the 588th were mostly the youngest and least experienced, and their aircraft were relics. Polikarpov Po-2 biplanes built for training and crop dusting, not for war. Soviet air planners saw them as little more than placeholders, filling a gap until real machines and real pilots could be found. The Po-2 canvas skin and wooden frame offered no protection, no armor, no guns. Bomb load was barely 350 kilograms. The cockpit was open, the instruments were basic, and the only navigation aids were a compass, a stopwatch, and a ruler. There were no radios, no radar, and until 1944, no parachutes. The logic was brutal. Every kilogram saved meant more bombs or more fuel. The 588th was not expected to last. Officially, their mission was to keep the enemy awake. Unofficially, they were being sent to die in machines the rest of the Air Force had already written off. Yet the women volunteered in droves, driven by Raskova's call and the knowledge that the front was collapsing. They accepted the Po-2, and with it the odds of survival stamped on every plywood wing. The Polikarpov Po-2 was a machine built for anything but survival. Its frame was little more than plywood strips and stretched canvas, stitched together in workshops that once turned out trainers for flying clubs and crop dusting. Every part of the aircraft screamed vulnerability. The skin could be pierced by a screwdriver, let alone a bullet. There was no armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, and no protection for the 2-person crew. A single tracer round, the kind fired by every German machine gun, could set the whole plane ablaze. Pilots knew what that meant. If fire touched the fabric, the Po-2 would burn up before it reached the ground. The only metal part of the aircraft was the engine. Everything else would vanish in smoke and flame. Bomb load was another limit. Each sortie carried just 350 kilograms of bombs, less than a single engine's worth on a modern bomber. That meant more flights, more risk, and no margin for error. There were no defensive guns, no radios for help, and not even parachutes until late 1943. Commanders calculated that the extra weight of a parachute, 20 kilograms per crew, could be traded for more fuel or an extra bomb. The message was clear: survival was not part of the plan. Crews navigated by flashlight and ruler, plotting courses on paper maps in the dark. The open cockpit offered no shelter from the Russian night, and every sortie meant exposure to cold, to flak, and to the certainty that one lucky hit would end everything. The women who climbed into these planes called them coffins with wings. They accepted every flaw because the alternative was no planes at all. Every night, the crews of the 588th Regiment turned the Po-2's silence into a weapon. Each sortie began with the pilot and navigator climbing to altitude, scanning the dark below for the faint glow of German campfires or the sharp angles of a supply depot. 1 to 2 kilometers from the target, the pilot reached for the throttle and cut the engine. Suddenly, the only sound was wind hissing through canvas and struts. The aircraft glided forward, invisible to radar, nearly inaudible from the ground. German sentries, trained to listen for the drone of engines, heard only a faint whooshing, like a broomstick sweeping across the sky. That eerie sound gave rise to the name Nachthexen, or night witches. The attack depended on precision and teamwork. The navigator, hunched in the open cockpit, tracked the seconds with a stopwatch, counted off the distance and read the map by flashlight. At the right moment, she released the bombs. The Po, suddenly lighter, jolted in the air. Now came the most dangerous part, restarting the engine. In the Russian night, with ice forming on the controls, the pilot pulled the starter. Sometimes the engine coughed back to life, sometimes it did not. If the restart failed, the crew had to glide home in silence, searching for a blacked-out field or a frozen pasture to land. This method was repeated, sortie after sortie, through the long hours before dawn. The unpredictability of the gliding approach left German gunners guessing, their searchlights swinging wildly, their flak bursts always a step behind. For the women in the cockpit, every silent descent was a gamble, precision, nerve, and luck measured out in kilometers and seconds. Over 3 years, the 588th Regiment launched more than 23,000 sorties, an operational tempo unmatched by most bomber groups in the war. The numbers tell their own story. More than 3,000 tons of bombs and 26,000 incendiary shells fell from the wings of Po-2 biplanes onto German supply lines, bridges, and encampments. For the pilots, this was not a matter of 1 or 2 missions before sunrise. On active nights, crews flew anywhere from 8 to 18 sorties, spending up to 10 hours in the air with barely enough time on the ground to refuel, reload, and take off again. The average pilot completed 800 sorties over her wartime service, more than 30 times the number that ended a bomber tour in the West. Each flight meant another round of cold, fatigue, and risk, repeated until the numbers themselves became a measure of endurance as much as destruction. These figures stand as the regiment's true legacy, relentless, unending pressure that wore down the enemy one small bomb at a time. 32 women from the 588th Regiment never returned from their sorties. Some were lost to enemy fire, others to mechanical failure, or to the simple fact that a burning Po-2 offered no escape. One survivor described the aftermath of a tracer hit. The plane would burn up completely in the air before reaching the ground like a match. For the crews, there was no armor, no protection, and until late in the war, no parachutes. The choice was stark. Stay in the cockpit as the canvas and wood turned to flame, or jump into darkness with nothing but hope. This vulnerability was no secret to the enemy. German pilots, frustrated by the near impossibility of intercepting a Po-2, joked that shooting one down should earn the Iron Cross, a medal usually reserved for 20 Allied bombers. The Luftwaffe's official records never formalized such a bounty, but the legend stuck, a measure of the fear and respect these women inspired. Across the Eastern Front, the Night Witches became a whispered threat, unpredictable, unstoppable, and impossible to counter. In a world obsessed with next-generation warfare, the Night Witches prove that tactical genius can turn weakness into fear. Their story endures because it exposes a truth. Technology alone never guarantees dominance, and human resolve still rewrites the rules. History remembers those who refuse to play by them. What is your take?